The continued leadership of two pastors serving 3-year slots each during the first part of this decade served the church well. One of the tasks of the early church was to manage the membership list, especially the delinquent list. There were many on the rolls who hadn't shown up for months or even years, and with many new people being received into the church and being baptized, this was a good time to ascertain the membership status of the non-attenders. They were first visited by a committee, not once but several times, with patience and grace over a period of months before a letter of dismissal was sent. With this young pastor, they felt a spiritual hope that they hadn't felt for a long time. Not that they didn't have hope previously, but the last decade was a real financial struggle for the church. Now they are on a path to control their finances, to observe good business practice, including an annual meeting to elect officers and trustees. In addition, quarterly reports were produced throughout the year.
State of the Church, January 3rd, 1891. Another year has come to a close, and with it we have closed another year of church work. And while we have not accomplished as much, perhaps, as we have desired, yet we have much reason to be thankful for the spiritual prosperity which we have enjoyed during the past year. We as a church have been blessed of God by being permitted to labor in His cause, and we have been made to rejoice in seeing so many accessions to our number. There have been 9 baptized, and with their personal Christian experience have united with the church. We have every reason to believe that every one of them is endeavoring to live consistent Christian lives. Our covenant meetings have been quite well attended. Brother Folsom is still with us. He has been giving us a series of sermons on the life of Paul, which has been interesting and also beneficial to all who have heard them. At the beginning of another new year, we as a church would unite our hearts and hands in endeavoring to labor more earnestly for advancement of God's cause and the upbuilding of His kingdom.
The covenant meetings from September to December 1891 were well attended with great rejoicing in the Lord. The reading of the covenant, the testimonies given, the singing and prayers were all led by the pastor. The regular Sabbath services were well attended during both Reverend Folsom's and Brother Brinstad's terms, but in the fall of 1892, attendance at covenant meetings declined. In 1892, Brother Brinstad was absent from the pulpit for a few months, attending conference meetings in Chicago for the recognition of churches. Problems arose during the last month of Brinstad's term. In February, he sent a letter to the church leaders which prompted a special meeting. He suggested that they consider calling a supply pastor. At that special meeting, they decided to call Reverend Osborne. In April, they must have had a covenant or business meeting where something awful must have happened, because in the May entry, they voted to strike the entire April meeting from the book. From 1893 to the turn of the century, there was a series of supply preachers. They lasted from a few months to almost a year. These Christian soldiers marched on. Even with poor attendance at the covenant business meetings, they performed their duties to the church, including hiring a sexton yearly, assigning committees to oversee the upkeep and repairs on the church and parsonage. They instructed the trustees to rent the parsonage with a 6-month contract to provide some revenue for the church. During Reverend Osborne's 6-month term, the only meeting was a covenant meeting. No business was done. A.E. Goodman's term lasted only 10 months. They held 2 regular covenant meetings and their yearly business meeting, where the only business was the election of officers. After Goodman resigned, they closed the church for about 5 months.
While the Lord has graciously spared most of his flock, one beloved sister has been taken to the better land. Our sister, Mrs. Truman Jones, fell asleep in Jesus on this Sabbath morning.
The next pulpit supply, Reverend Peck, lasted only 5 months, after which Reverend Crawford came aboard and stayed for a year. During his term, only one covenant meeting was held, but in October, the church made an effort to try to raise the money to support him for the year.
In the death of our sister Jane Pollard, the church mourns one of its faithful and loyal pillars. Our church membership, now so small, severely feels the loss of a single helper, for the laborers are few. We shall feel her loss. It closed another Christian home to us.
The August covenant meeting was quite well attended, with Reverend James Goodman presiding. The only other meeting held during his term was in October. His term lasted 6 months. After he left, they had no pastor or pulpit supply until July 1898.
Mrs. Felinda Fowler, nee Warren, our oldest member, fell asleep this month. In a letter written by her, dated August 1834, she spoke of the organizing of the church here and of the great joy experienced by her on that occasion. The influence of her life remains an inspiration to all who knew her.
In the 8 years between August 1893 and May 1901, there were 7 supply pastors, with only one lasting a year. There were several months of no activity, in addition to a 6-month closing of the church. The election of officers was the only business during these years. The covenant meetings were sparsely and sporadically attended. Reverend Mallory retired from the Baptist Church in Aurora and moved into the Lamb residence across the street from the church. They contacted him to be their pulpit supply for an undetermined length of time. He accepted the call. The first covenant meeting resulted in testimonies and prayers from all present. They praised the Lord, for they felt the church starting to grow again. Between May and December, they received 4 new members. The prospects of the church started to look up under Reverend Mallory's leadership, with the resumption of regular covenant meetings and more people interested in the church. He started to improve the financial status of the church by raising money to buy material to work with, and by doing most of the work on the church and parsonage himself. By the end of 1902, the front foundation of the church was repaired. The belfry was fixed. He introduced the business of getting a bell and painted the church with 2 coats of paint. He also saw to the repair of the pumps, outbuildings, and cistern. The church held a very successful fundraising with the help of the members of his old church in Aurora and some surrounding area churches. Tickets were 20 cents. Nearly everyone from neighboring towns as well as Warrenville residents attended. They collected over $90 to be used to paint and paper the inside of the church. These efforts ceased when Reverend Mallory had a heart attack while running to catch the train to Chicago for church business. He was finishing up a project on the parsonage before rushing off to catch the train. He died on the platform at the Warrenville station.
Early this morning, we received word that our greatly beloved pastor had passed out of this life into the life beyond. We mourn our loss, but such a noble Christian life as that of our leader will live on into the hearts of those who loved him. During Dr. Mallory's short pastorate here, our church picked up wonderfully. Many improvements were implemented during his stay. We feel a great work has been accomplished and left as a monument to the memory of one who labored for his master, one whom God saw fit to take in the midst of his work to dwell in that beautiful home above.
While they mourned their beloved pastor, friends of Dr. Mallory took his place acting as pulpit supply until they were ready to call another pastor.
We thank the dear Master for all these blessings, and we hope to keep our light burning here in the village.
Even before the turn of the century, women served as elected officers of the church. At first, they were church clerks. As members dwindled, more women were in attendance. They served as treasurers and eventually trustees and deacons. Approaching 1907, the membership was 9 women and 4 men. A year and a half later, there were only divinity students in the pulpit. Despite all efforts, it was necessary to close the church. 6 months after closing the church, the Chicago Baptist Association sent 2 men to assess reopening the church. These men were known to help struggling churches. They reopened the Sabbath school and church services with Mr. Kerr preaching and acting as superintendent of the Sabbath school.